Hey, what's up? Hello, my name is Emma, and today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in May. In the month of May, I read 9 books, which in itself is already really impressive, but I actually finished all of these books in the span of 3 weeks because I did not read anything at all the last week of May due to Book Expo and BookCon. So I read a ton of books in a short period of time, which is super exciting. If you are very new to my channel or just happen to miss it, during the month of May, I also filmed 3 weekly reading vlogs. So if you were interested in hearing more in-depth thoughts about these books as they come, I will link all 3 of those reading vlogs down below, and you can check out not only all the good things that I read, but also some cool fun things I got to do with my friends during May. The first book I completed in May is A Question for Holmes by Brittany Cavallaro, which is the 4th and final book in the Charlotte Holmes series. If you have not heard of this series, it is a collection of different mysteries following the descendants of Sherlock Holmes and John Watson. It is so fun and so well developed, and I would just highly recommend you would pick it up if you haven't already. But for the final book, I ended up giving it a rating of 4.5 out of 5 stars because I really enjoyed it, and I feel like it made me remember all the reasons why I loved this series. The characters are by far the most charming element of this story. I just adore Jamie and Charlotte with all of my heart, and I just want to fiercely protect them for the rest of my life. These characters have been through so much in this series, and just seeing where they have ended up, how much they have developed on their own and grown together, has just been really beautiful to watch unfold. The ending of this book seems to be quite polarizing. I feel like a lot of people have been unsatisfied by it, but personally I really liked the way things ended up. I would just love to see more from Jamie and Charlotte. I feel like I just want a 5th book in this series to see where things go from here. I also feel like the mystery in this book was more tightly wound and better constructed than previous books. I would say that 2 and 3, like numbers 2 and 3 in this series, are a little bit more dark and intense, but 1 and 4 are a bit more like lighthearted and fun-loving, even though there is, of course, all of this kidnapping and murder and like grotesque stuff going on. It wasn't my favorite mystery. I have a soft spot for book number 1, but I can definitely tell that there have been a lot of improvements made on planning out these mysteries and how they come across in the book, which is a really great thing. The only thing I didn't like about this book was the audiobook. I just was not having it with the narrator. And it's really perplexing because I've actually listened to quite a few books narrated by Julia Wieland, and they are some of my favorite audiobooks I've ever listened to, but A Question of Holmes just did not really do it for me. I just really despise young adult audiobooks that are narrated by an older woman who is using a British accent, because I feel like there's just such a huge contrast between the teenage main characters and who is narrating it, and it caused me to rewind a lot more and have more trouble focusing. And so I wouldn't really recommend the audiobook for this one based on my personal experience, but the story itself was really good and I thoroughly enjoyed it. The first book I physically read in May was Again But Better by Christine Riccio. I'm sure you've heard of Again But Better. It is the story of a girl named Shane who travels to a study abroad program in London in order to sort of do over her college experience. Now, of course, Christine is a fellow booktuber and a really good friend of mine, so of course there is a little bit of bias that is going to be played in there, but there are so many things about Again But Better that have appealed to me on a personal level, and I went into this book knowing that I would be absolutely shocked if I didn't like it. And I'm happy to say that my expectations were correct because I ended up giving it 4 out of 5 stars, and I really enjoyed it. Like, literally, for the first, 60 pages of this book, I could not stop smiling. I was super engaged, always wanting to know what happened next, and just had a really great time. I really enjoyed Shane as a main character. Obviously, there are distinct similarities between Shane and Christine, but she is just like goofy and naive and dramatic at the start of the story, but she goes through some serious character development that I really enjoyed watching. On the contrary, I really struggled with the love interest in this story named Pilot, because in some moments he was really charming and witty and funny, and then in others I was so frustrated with him I felt I would never be able to get past it and go back to liking him. I did have some problems with the way that Shane and Pilot would handle certain situations, but I feel like most of my frustration is aimed at Pilot in this situation. But Overall, it was like the fluffy, somewhat infuriating YA romance I was expecting. Additionally though, I really would have liked to see more of the side characters because I thought that they had some great personalities, but I just don't think we got to know them as well as Shane and Pilot. I thought the writing of this book was really fair, especially for a debut. I thought the pacing and the storytelling was done particularly well. I can definitely recognize that the writing in this book is not going to be fulfilling for everyone, but my main gripe with it is just that like the cadence of Shane's narration was not my cup of tea. Her word choice and thought process and some jokes at some point didn't really align with me as a reader, but this is exactly where my bias being Christine's friend comes into play, because although it's not what I prefer as a reader, I know this is Christine's voice, I know this is how she talks, and like this is exactly how she would react in a lot of these situations, so it enabled me to find joy and laugh at certain things that I may not have done if it was written from a different author. Also, there's a ton of pop culture references in this book, which a lot of people just like despise, but I personally don't really care for pop culture references. They were fine to me. Halfway through the book, there is a big plot twist that completely changes the direction of the story, and I thought it was a really unexpected risk for Christine to take. I do wish like the structure of this plot twist had been fleshed out a little bit more so we could understand it better, and I do feel like I prefer the first half of this book just because it was more in line with what I was expecting from the story, but the second half did still have a lot of character development and growth that I feel made it a satisfying story all the way through. Overall, I really enjoyed Again But Better. It gave me the sense of nostalgia even though it was a new story, because it made me think back to 17-year-old Emma, who was so obsessed with England, so lonely, and like only had her books, and I just felt like I had so much to relate to Shane with in this story. There are so many people out there that are gonna say that like I'm just giving it a good review because Christine is my friend, and like if you think that, like I can't change your mind. But like I firmly believe like had I read this book at 17, like this would be my favorite contemporary novel I have ever freaking read, and for that reason it is still really close to my heart and was just fun and fluffy and special and funny, and if you haven't read it yet, I would really recommend you pick it up. Now we're getting into all the books that I read in my reading vlogs, the first being People Kill People by Ellen Hopkins. This is a book that is half told in poetry and half told in second-person perspective, and it follows 6 teenagers on the topic of gun violence. I ended up giving People Kill People 5 out of 5 stars. It was a very unexpected but impactful read to me, and I just gushed about it the entire time. The social commentary in this book is just impeccable. Like, I did not expect this book to go so deep into so many varying perspectives on the topics of guns, and it was just really fulfilling. There are some characters in this book that have been deeply negatively impacted by guns in their lifetime, and there are others that love them and feel so much power with them. To explain further, there are 2 characters in this book who are white supremacists, and I just thought it was really necessary for Ellen Hopkins to take that very controversial perspective and allow us to read from what it is like to be one of these people. I can't say like these are characters that are really important to me individually and I will carry them with me the rest of my life, but they go through so much development and so much change, and I just found it a really valuable reading experience. I'm not exactly a good critic on poetry. I don't consider myself to be someone who particularly likes poetry, so I don't know how much weight my opinion really holds here, but I really enjoyed it. A lot of the poems are actually told from the voice of violence, along with the topic of guns in this book. It also delves into just the concept of violence in general and how every single person possesses the capability and the thoughts necessary to enact on violence, and it discusses sort of why some people refrain from it, whereas why other people embrace it. God, I feel like I just really want like a book club to talk to and just dive into the analysis of this book, because there's so much to unpack that I really can't even go through in this wrap up. But if you are someone that is looking for like a very timely novel that examines different perspectives on a really serious issue and like something that is just going to get your brain whirring until the very end, I'd really, really recommend you pick up People Kill People because it was a surprising favorite of mine. The next audiobook I listened to in May is King of Fools by Amanda Foody, which is the sequel to Ace of Shades, and this is a young adult fantasy story about a girl named N who travels to the magical city of Sin in search of her mother who has gone missing, and her only lead is a crime lord. I adored Ace of Shades. It was on my favorites of 2018 list, and I have to say that the sequel did not disappoint because I also gave this 4.5 out of 5 stars. Something that really took me by surprise in this book was the political arc. There's just so much political intrigue between the different gangs of New Reigns and the different mafia families. There's a huge election going on that is going to dictate a lot of the government for the next installment. So it was just really complex and well thought out and very unexpected, but I loved it. The downside is that as interesting as it was and as much as it added to the story, I think it just like weighed it down a bit. It made the story a little bit slow and more heavy, which I didn't like as much compared to Ace of Shades. I really, really love the magic system in this story. It is just so complex. There are so many layers to it, different kinds of abilities and families and hierarchies of powers, and it is just so freaking impressive compared to a lot of young adult fantasies that I feel like are being put out. I can't even keep talking about this book because I'm just thinking about how much I love the magic system. I love the characters of this story so much, and King of Fools specifically, we get the introduction of quite a few new characters that really added to the story and were equally as well developed, and I'm just so freaking pumped to see where new things go in the third and final installment when it comes out. The only other thing I didn't like about King of Fools is that it sort of falls into my least favorite trope for young adult couples, and that is when like the main couple is not communicating and lying to each other and keeping things from one another, like for the greater good and to protect them, and it's so freaking dumb and frustrating, and I'm just tired of it. But like, and then Levi, am I right? Finally, the ending. Oh my god, I can't talk about the ending right now. It makes me feel things. You can watch my reading vlog for like a pretty tame in the moment experience of it. Life is going to be so meaningless until I get book 3. But like, wow, I am still shooketh. This was quite possibly one of the best endings to a book that I have read in such a long time. It was unexpected, it took risks, it opened up so much for the following book, and I'm just getting chills thinking about it. Every time I thought it was over with and done and like it was gonna end, just like something else blew up in the faces of the characters that they couldn't control, and it was really, really wonderful. I actually ran into Amanda Foody really quickly at BookCon, and I just said in her face, I was like, how could you? Like, I love you, but why would you do this to me? Incredible, amazing, fantastic.
Talented, brilliant, incredible, amazing, show-stopping, spectacular, never the same, totally unique.
Just, if you have not picked up Ace of Shades yet, I don't know how I could further sell this book to you because I feel like I talk about it a lot, but it really is worth the read. Next audiobook I listened to in May is Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows by J.K. Rowling. I finished my Harry Potter reread, and I feel like I just gotta start it all over again. I have a review on you. I talk about you every single year, and I just talked about you in this reading vlog. Like, I don't know what else I can provide for my subscribers by talking about you right now. I still love you though. We know I love Harry Potter. I have a tattoo here. I have a tattoo here. I have literally lost count of how many times I have read Harry Potter at this point. I am not exaggerating. But it was just as good the like 20th time probably. I really read it almost that much. I feel like I'm shocked every time I go into Deathly Hallows because I started and like once I get into it, I really forget how good this book is. This book particularly is just so multi-dimensional. It goes off in so many different directions, and I feel like the first time you're reading it, you really cannot expect all of the different directions it goes through. There's just so much thought and care and effort put into this book, and I just feel like everything was planned with such purpose, and I just really appreciate that. It's so good. It is irresistible. The second I start this book, I cannot put it down, and I am just always filled with an overwhelming sense of love and comfort and happiness and surprise, and it is just, it's so good. I have quite a few friends who have not yet read Harry Potter in their early adulthood, and they feel like they're behind on it and they'll never be able to catch up to the hype, but like seriously, Harry Potter is so worth the read. It is quite possibly not quite possibly, it is one of the most influential books I have ever read, and I am so blessed to re-experience the story every year for a reread. It just makes my heart happy. The next book I physically read in May is The List by Patricia Ford, and I have a very complex history with you, don't I? I talk to my books a lot in wrap-ups, don't I? I feel like I've done that like more than a couple of times. The List is a dystopian middle grade story all about a girl named Letta who is the apprentice to the wordsmith of a city called Ark, where all of the inhabitants are forced to only speak using 500 words. So I started reading The List for the first time in November of 2018. I actually started it for a readathon that I filmed a reading vlog for, so if you want to check out my very first initial thoughts on this book, I'll link it below. I chose to listen to the audiobook, and I forget how far I got into it, maybe like 70%, and then I decided to put it down just because the audiobook was really not working for me. I really loved so much about the book, but I was having trouble retaining information, kind of like another problem I had with a narrator with a British accent that did not work for me. So I put it down and vowed that I would pick it up physically and reread the story from the start to see how I felt about it, because I thought I really had the potential to love this book. But unfortunately, after finishing the book, I realized that I still didn't love it as much as I wanted to, and I'm settling on a rating of 3 stars. One thing I really loved about this book was the writing style. Like I said before, writing is usually not the most important thing to me when it comes to a book, but there was just something so effervescent and flowery and beautiful about this prose that I could not get enough of it. I also loved the fact that this book had a ton of strong environmentalist themes, as the whole history behind the city of Ark is that the world was basically destroyed by global warming. That's not a topic that I feel is discussed in books a lot, so I was really drawn in by it, and it made me happy to see it throughout the story. But there were quite a lot of unanticipated downsides of the book, particularly with the environmentalist themes. I really loved the inclusion of global warming and whatnot, but I feel like it was more of a backdrop to the story that only served as a history, as opposed to it being something that was continually going on with the storyline. Also, the characters just did not really stand out. Letta is the only person in this book that had some personality, and I still feel like I didn't really know her beyond what she was trying to accomplish. The pacing of the book was weirdly fast at some points. I'm still conflicted on if I feel this is because it's a children's book and they're trying to really capture the attention and not draw things out to make young readers bored, or if it is just the author didn't expand on things enough. And unfortunately, the plot became very underwhelming as the story went on. I had high expectations in the beginning because the world itself was really rich, but that was the only thing in this book that I feel had a really solid foundation behind it. The ending was also very open-ended and not in a good way. I really finished this book thinking oh, okay, they're setting up for another story, and we're gonna see how the consequences of what happened in book 1 play out, and there's no sequel, so it just sort of felt unfinished. There was a lot to this book that I really enjoyed, and I'm glad that I read it again and gave it a second chance to complete it, but I was also pretty disappointed, and I feel like I just expected a lot more out of this book. Next book I completed in May is Girl Gone Viral by Arvind Amati, which is a sort of near futuristic science fiction novel that is all about virtual reality. Because I care about being open and honest with you guys, I do want to reiterate that I did do a sponsored video for the promotion of this book recently, but I had no obligation to read or review it, and I'm still giving you guys my honest opinions. I'm happy to say I really enjoyed Girl Gone Viral. This is another book that I ended up giving 4 out of 5 stars, and I just found it very enjoyable all throughout. I really loved Opal as a main character. She is super intelligent, clever, and determined, but she's also pretty flawed because she has some questionable ideas on what reality should really look like, and for someone who preaches so much about honesty on her online platform, she also does quite a bit of lying and not telling the truth herself, so it made for a very interesting story. Girl Gone Viral Viral is kind of a combination between The Social Network in Black Mirror, because it is all about technology's influence, how virtual reality has improved the world, and how it has also created additional problems. And I just thought the social commentary on this book as well was really thorough and well done. I don't know what it is, but I just really have a thing for like near futuristic virtual reality books. Like, it's just a weird thing that I always get enjoyment out of, and I thought that Girl Gone Viral was a really interesting take on it. It's definitely a bit smaller and more centralized to like this particular area in California, whereas similar books like Warcross and Ready Player One are a bit more expansive and global, but it was still really satisfying. It was like exactly what I needed to read at the moment. I don't feel there are a ton of like major flaws in this book. I feel like there are just more things that I would have preferred to have been explored differently. For example, in this book, Opal and her friends run a sort of like YouTube channel, is probably the closest thing I could relate it to. It's on the virtual reality network, and they're doing it in order to win a contest. And I just feel like I didn't really get what they were trying to accomplish with these episodes. Like, they had the idea and they made the idea clear, but through the segments that we are shown in the book, it didn't really align to their mission, so I thought that was a little peculiar. The disappearance of Opal's father and what happened to him was a great suspenseful driving force of this story, and I really did enjoy finding out what happened to him in the end. I just wish it had been explored and like detailed to readers a little bit more differently. And this is another ending where I feel like things wrapped up pretty quickly. Like, some things were left open-ended, but there's no sequel, so we don't get to find out what really happens. And so I just would have preferred some things to be a little bit more expansive, but overall it was a very enjoyable book. If you're someone like me that likes these like sort of low sci-fi novels that deal with technology's influence, I would definitely recommend it. So your girl's gotta go to class, so we're gonna finish these last two books later. I'm home from school. After class, I ended up going out for dinner and drinks with some of my classmates, which was really fun, but it poured so hard while we were leaving the bar, and so I just got soaked and I was feeling gross, so I wanted to get ready for bed before I finished filming this video. I just have two more audiobooks to share that I read in May, the first being The Golden Tower by Cassandra Clare and Holly Black, which is the fifth and final installment in the Magisterium series. If you've been watching my wrap-ups for a very long time, you might remember that I've had some up and downs with the series. I wasn't a big fan of book 1. I liked book 2. I did not like book 3, and I really liked book 4. So naturally, I wasn't really sure how I was going to feel about The Golden Tower. Like, book 4 ended on such a high note for me, and I was really hyped for it. But even though I was enjoying it in the beginning, nearing the end of the story, it like really took a turn for the worse for me, and I feel like the overall rating I have to give it is 2.5 stars. This is officially the lowest rating I have ever given a Cassandra Clare book, so y'all better not say I only give her 5 stars. There were things I did like about The Golden Tower. Like, I really appreciated how much more mature and darker and intense this book is compared to some of the earlier installments. Obviously, when you're following characters as they grow older, that's going to happen, but I just felt that portion of it was done really well. I also really appreciated the expansion on the magic system in this book. The world of the Magisterium is not my favorite fantasy out there, but I feel like consistently they have been adding on more things that make it more complex and deep, and so I really appreciated specifically like the route that this book took with the devoured of different elements. When I started this book, it felt very unstructured. By the middle, like, I could sort of see what their mission was, what the characters were trying to accomplish, but nearing the end again, I just felt like the plot completely dissipated and we were just watching events unfold that weren't strongly connected. Solutions just came really easily to our main cast, which caused there to be no sense of urgency for them solving their problems. Even if the plots of certain installments of this series were not the most intriguing for me, the characters were always super endearing, and like the reason I kept coming back, I just loved watching their development, and it's a shame that I felt that they were so watered down in this book. Personality personalities just weren't there. I didn't care about any of them the way I used to, and like particularly the villain in this book annoyed the crap out of me because there was just no point for him to be the main villain. Like there was nothing enticing about him. He wasn't clever. He was just powerful, and therefore he was evil. It's one of those books that I didn't have a huge problem with while reading, but the more I think about it, like the more annoyed and frustrated I get because I just don't understand what happened here. It ended up being a really big letdown. I'm sad I didn't like it because I wanted to love this series so badly, but like I'm unfortunately very happy I'm done with this book and I don't have to continue reading it. But thankfully I'm closing out on a lighter note because the last audiobook that I listened to in May was With the Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. I loved this book. Like going right from The Golden Tower, which became a drag in the end and I was not enjoying it and I was just listening to finish it, to With the Fire on High that I could not get enough of. I just felt like so rejuvenated as a reader, and I remembered how good it feels to listen to an audiobook. If you haven't heard of this book, it's about a teen named Imani who has a 2-year-old daughter, and it basically just follows her as she tries to delve into her passion for culinary arts and navigate the world of being a teenager and also a single mother. Every single time I talk about Elizabeth Acevedo, I talk about how incredible her writing is because it truly is some of the most impressive shit I've seen on the market for young adult books lately. This woman just has such a talent for writing. Like, I genuinely am taken aback while I'm reading her books because her syntax and word choice is just so mind-blowingly perfect. Her voice as an author is just so authentic to teens while also being really mature and sophisticated, and it just makes it a very memorable experience. I loved the characters in this book. Oh my gosh. Imani stole my heart from the first chapter, and like that's pretty unusual for a contemporary novel. Like contemporaries for me are usually about the plot and the issue being discussed, and obviously characters are an integral part of that, but she is just so determined and stubborn and passionate and dedicated, and I just really loved reading from her perspective. Imani's abuela was so supportive and Malachi was just super charming and adorable. I loved the relationships in this book. Like, wow, absolutely everyone Imani had a connection to, whether it was her daughter Emma, her abuela, Malachi, her baby daddy who she is not dating at the moment, but they're trying this co-parenting thing as teenagers, her strained relationship with her father who doesn't give her a lot of attention, and her complicated feelings about her mother who she's never known, just made for such a well-rounded story full of depth and emotion. I loved all the cooking in this book. Like, I don't know how to cook. I'm a terrible cook, but reading about Imani's love for cooking, the way it impacts other people and allows them to feel so many things was really beautiful to read about, along with the characters and their relationship. Just like the growth from absolutely everyone was really well developed. The only concrete problem I can identify, and I say problem with air quotes because it's more of like a preference for me, is that I just feel like the plot itself wasn't strong enough. It felt sort of like one of those slice of life books where you're sort of just following a character going through a particular period in their life. And that's not a bad thing because this book is full of so many different themes and conflicts, but for some reason, when I think of like the overall plot, it was just a little bit underwhelming because I feel like there wasn't that one big problem that's going to tie everything together. And I feel like I just would have wanted to see that from this book. Did I settle on 4.5 stars or 5? I literally can't remember. I have to go check my reading vlog. Okay, so I am giving this book 5 out of 5 stars because that's what I feel it like truly deserves. And I just feel like my personal preference on the plot isn't big enough for me to dock a star. So this is a 5 out of 5 star read for me. I would highly recommend it to anyone who is interested in contemporary young adult fiction. I feel like it just has the ability to satisfy so many different people of varying tastes, and I really, really would like more people to read Elizabeth Acevedo's books. So that concludes my wrap up for the month of May. I'm sorry it's a little late, but with Book Expo, BookCon, and grad school, like, this was the only time I had to do it. In the comments below, I would love to know what books you read in the month of May, and if you enjoyed them, if you didn't like them, if you have any thoughts on the books that I have read this month, I would love to know. But that is it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you soon for a new one. Bye!